Hey YouTube, Tom itself here. We're taking a trip to the red planet Duna, fourth planet from the Kerbal Sun, and we're also going to stop by Ike, Duna's moon. The trip to Duna is going to take much less fuel than the one to Moho, and so everything is a fair bit simpler. It's a lot easier to have a higher thrust-to-weight ratio at launch, and everything works out in general just a lot better. There are several reasons for that. The first and most obvious one is just the cost of the interplanetary transfer. But Duna and Kerbal are also very much in the same orbital plane around the Sun, whereas that's not the case with Moho, and I needed, I think, a 1600 meter per second burn on that, in my case, in order to make that. Yeah, that cost a lot. But also that Duna has a thin atmosphere. It'll be useful in slowing myself down. I can use parachutes to land, and that will save me fuel, but it's not so thick that it'll cost me a whole lot to get back off the surface. I've timed things just right so that my burn that takes me into orbit around Kerbal is also my interplanetary burn. And so with one ship on the way to Duna, we can take a look back at how the Moho spacecraft came back to Kerbal. As you may recall from last time, we have a ship coming back from Moho with a load of science. And currently, we're actually headed for an impact with Kerbal. I'm going to raise my orbit just a little bit so I get a periapse just inside the atmosphere. But just give us a little more time to slow down. I don't expect any problems. I don't have any kind of a deadly re-entry mod or anything. But still, it just seems like the better way to do things. We're coming in at over 5,000 meters per second. That's more than double what orbital velocity is for Kerbal. So this is one of the fastest re-entries I've ever done. It seems that I got a bit mixed up on when the transfer window from Kerbal to Duna was, and I actually launched after my Moho spacecraft returned, so I was able to use some of this 1400 science that I collected by retrieving the spaceship in order to outfit my ship that's headed to Duna. I had managed to unlock some more parts just with the science I'd transmitted back, but with that I'm able to add a few more neat toys to my spaceship, and we'll get to see those later. I'm going to use Duna's atmosphere to slow myself down and get myself into an orbit. It's called Aerobraking. And instead of using trial and error to get a happy medium between still flinging myself out into outer space and crashing into the planet, I'm going to use this handy online calculator. All I have to give it is my current altitude, orbital velocity, periapse, and desired apoapse after the aerobrake, and it'll tell me what I should make my periapse in order to achieve that. After I make that short correction burn, all that's left to do is to pull in the solar panels so they don't get broken off in the atmosphere as I go flying through, and wait and watch the show. So we are slowing down, but not very much. Duna's atmosphere isn't anywhere near as thick as Kerbal's, and so I go lower and yet lose less velocity. Still, that tool gave me the right periapse, and I get just the apoapse I was looking for, though I'm a little bit above the plane I expected to be in. I'm doing this very strange maneuver because I want to put mapping satellites around both Duna and Ike. And mapping satellites go into polar orbits. But plane changes, going from an equatorial orbit to a polar orbit, is fairly expensive in terms of fuel. And so I did things this way, thinking it would work out fairly well. I don't know if there's a name for this, maybe. But, well, in the end, on my first pass after the aerobrake, I managed to make a burn that will get me an encounter with Ike. I have two small mapping satellites, one for Duna and one for Ike, so that I can scan both at the same time. But they don't have a whole lot of fuel each. That gets kind of heavy carrying around a lot of extra fuel just for satellites, and so I want to save that as much as possible for any orbit changes that I might need from those satellites. So I'm going to put them into orbit from my main spacecraft and then drop them off and use the satellite's engines in order to correct where I need them to be. The satellite that's headed to Duna has the option to do additional aerobraking to save fuel. That's good because I want to go to Ike first, and so I'm trying to set this up so that I can just let go of the satellite and then make my burn to get into orbit around Ike. And that one is going to go around Duna, and now the rest of this whole thing we're going to put around Ike. So I have a ton of fuel left over for my main interplanetary stage, and so I'm going to try and use that to move my spacecraft and the mapping satellite around Ike, but that means it's unbalanced, and so it's a little tricky. I have to take things kind of slow, but the mapping satellite isn't that heavy. I'm not that unbalanced, and it works out okay. But a quick jump back to the Duna mapping satellite. What's going on? Oh, I need a stage. Is that it? What's going on? Hey, there we go. Minor staging issues aside, things go very well. Maybe there's something with the probe body not being the root part or something, I don't know. Anyway, we get a good mapping orbit around Duna and can go back to Ike to see how the mapping is going. What? I'm sorry, what happened here? Well, that is certainly interesting. Yes, that is very interesting. I have not seen ground tracks like that before in KSP, but we are going to map the entire moon, so it works out just fine. Okay, we have finished our wonderful high-res map of Ike. So here's the elevation, but as we saw with Moho, I want to look not just at elevation, but at surface roughness or slope. Well, now this is a little bit trickier to read for some reason. But again, like Moho, I'd like to land somewhere near the equator and fairly flat. That's mostly what I'm looking for. But we have another dilemma. It's similar to the which direction is the sun pointed, and it's that, well, only one side of Ike can actually see Duna. And I'd kind of like to be able to see Duna from Ike, so I should pick a place where I can do that. Now, I'm about to go behind Ike. If I pull up the ground track map, that means I want to land probably somewhere on the left side of this map rather than the right side, so that I'll be able to see Duna from Ike. In the same way that our moon is tidally locked to the Earth, we can only see one side of it, Ike is tidally locked to Duna. But not just that, where Earth's moon can be seen anywhere on the planet, at least at some times, Ike can only be seen from one side of Duna. It's a very interesting relationship. This looks to be about the flattest spot near the equator. I'm going to pass over soon. I'm going to have to do a little bit of a burn to the side to make it happen, but I think this will do. So let's disconnect ourselves from the mapping satellite. It's shortly after this that I realize I've made well, I guess it's not too terrible, but I've made a mistake in my design process, and I am going to be unable to retrieve the science that I got from mapping both Duna and Ike. And that is, I forgot to put comms antennas on the mapping satellites. Now, if I'd remembered to collect it before I decoupled it from my main spacecraft, I could have gotten it, but I forgot, and, well, now it's gone. I assume if I come back with another mapping satellite with the same piece of equipment and an antenna, I'll be able to collect that data without actually having to remap the planet. Because as you can see, my main spacecraft can still see the mapping data on Ike, even though I haven't collected the science data from it, and I can't from my spacecraft because I've got a different piece of the mapping mods equipment on there. But I've already made my deorbit burn, and I'm well on my way to the surface of Ike in what looks to be a pretty good landing spot. About 1,000 meters to the surface. Let's go ahead and ditch the tank. I was a bit surprised my interplanetary drive made it all the way to Ike, but I have to ditch it now so I can deploy my landing legs. So that we don't have to worry about it. Oh, I think I left the engine on. That I did. Alright, that's fine. Get those gears down. Now listen carefully, and you might be able to hear that tank hit the ground. It's just on the left side. I just heard the other tank hit the ground. And as I come in for a very easy landing here on Ike, I'm going to have to cut the video off here. I'll pick it up in the next one. We'll do some science on Ike and then head over to Duna and then back to Kerbal. But I'm having all sorts of technical issues with Vegas in the video, and I hopefully just starting a new project, keeping the video a bit shorter will alleviate some of those issues. Anyway, guys, thanks for sticking around, watching the Kerbal Space Program with me. It's a lot of fun, and I will see you next time. We'll get over to Duna. And a spectacular landing. There we have it.